Welcome to the State of the Globe podcast from the Global Governance Institute here in Brussels. In this podcast, we examine core issues related to all things that matter in the realm of global governance and global problem solving. My name is Joachim Koops, and today I'm sitting down with David Timis for the first of a three-part mini-series on the governance of artificial intelligence. In this mini-series, we will explore the economic and labor market aspects, societal challenges, including the impact of AI on democracy and human rights, as well as the international, geopolitical and global governance dimensions of AI. David Timis is a senior fellow in the AI governance program at the Global Governance Institute. He's also an AI governance, global communication and public affairs manager at Generation, one of the largest skilling and employment non-profit organizations. He has broad and wide-ranging experience and expertise across the public and private sector, including previously work for Google, Chatham House and the Council of Europe. In his work, he focuses on both the opportunities and risks of AI and how to meaningfully govern artificial intelligence across key economic, societal, and ethical issue areas. Today, we kick off the three-part mini-series with an in-depth discussion of AI and its impact on the current and future labor market, risks and opportunities, as well as some reflections on the challenges faced by education institutions in balancing the need for preparing the next generation of AI adopters on the one hand, and the risks related to the loss of critical thinking and other related challenges on the other hand. Enjoy this episode. David, great to have you here at the State of the Globe podcast. Can you introduce yourself to the listeners a little bit about your work on AI and also global governance, of course?
Sure. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here as a fellow of the Global Governance Institute, a senior fellow in AI governance. But outside of this role, I'm affiliated with a few other think tanks, both in Europe and in the US, focusing on the same topic, AI governance, but from different perspectives. I cover with my collaboration with the World Economic Forum, the AI and energy part, was with SCSP, a think tank in the US based in DC. I cover much more the tech and geopolitical race, so to say. And that's what I do on the think tank research side. Mm-hmm. Outside of it, I pride myself to be very much a practitioner at heart. Mm-hmm. I added this sort of research layer later on in my career. I'm still a sort of a baby researcher, if I may say so. Most of my now, I think 12 plus years has been spent working in the private sector initially at Google, mm-hmm. and currently in a nonprofit called generation.org, focused on helping people learn new skills, digital skills in particular, but not only, and prepare themselves with our help for the labor markets. And the labor markets, not just in Europe, but actually at Generation, we're active in 17 countries on 5 continents. And at Google, I used to manage Grow with Google, which is their digital skilling program in Romania, before moving to Brussels. And all these things give me, I would say, an in-depth perspective to see how different people are impacted by AI. And then there's the last layer, which I experience as an individual for my own business. Mm-hmm. I offer prompt engineering / AI literacy trainings for companies, NGOs, academics, as well as give talks on these very important topic, the impact of AI on workers, and society. As I like to pride myself, before it was cool. My first recorded TEDx on the topic was in 2019 at TEDx Luxembourg, with I think a few thousand people in the audience and I recently re-watched that talk, I was directionally right on something I still strongly believe in, mm-hmm. which is that the currency of the future will be skills, and that's one investment we should all make and double down on what are the skills that we could develop, and ideally there are already strengths that we have to become more anti-fragile regardless of what AI will do or not do to our jobs. And one other topic I was there, I think all of us were wrong, including the likes of Elon Musk or Demis Hassabis from Google DeepMind, was how fast this AI disruption will come. Mm-hmm. Because in 2019, I also, like them, much more illustrious individuals than myself, were thinking it's probably a good 15 to 20 years ahead of us, mm-hmm. whilst it was maybe just 5 years afterwards. So.
Sure.
Yeah,
the speed is indeed is quite something. Thanks so much. So this is the first conversation of 3 parts where we're going to dive a bit more deeply into the governance of AI, Today we're going to talk about the labor market, the economy, impact on companies, but also workers, and a little bit the nexus with higher education. Then we will also focus on the impact on democracy, and then finally the international cooperation, international governance dimension, also including a variety of related topics, including the so-called chip wars, impact on the environment, but also geopolitical competition and what international organizations can do. So today, zooming in, it might be a very general question, but maybe we should start on the issue of or the question of why is it important for the economy in the first place? Why do so many companies now adopt AI for what? For which actual productivity gains?
Yeah, I think you already named it. The main benefit is productivity gains, which we already see glimpses of it. As Robert Solow famously said some decades ago, we cannot see the computer age in the productivity statistics, but he was eventually proven wrong. It just took a bit longer. I feel it's very similar with AI now, that some people were already, quote unquote, seeing productivity gains even last year, even though they're probably not at the economy level, but mainly at the leading AI labs and tech firms deploying it quicker than anybody because they're developing it. However, my prediction, and do quote me on this, and I do have, again, great company, Erik Bjørnalsson, one of the leading economists in the world, who I'm in touch with on the subject, and we've exchanged a few notes on it. We both believe these productivity statistics that are sort of enabled by AI and AI being deployed efficiently in different companies across different sectors, we'll see a much better picture towards the end of this year than we've seen in the previous ones, because this is the year that both of us and other leading tech leaders, economists believe, this is the year that we finally see AI agents really being deployed at scale. Because again, AI agents were announced by the leading tech companies, including a few software as a service providers like Salesforce and Workday last year. So it's no longer a thing in Silicon Valley. But realistically, from announcement to deployment, it usually takes, well, basically more or less a year. But now I do hear more and more companies which are from other industries which are talking much more actively about agents. And why is this important? It's because, and here we're kind of going round in circles a bit, but in a positive way, because most of us are still experimenting AI by interacting with chatbots. And realistically speaking, whilst chatbots can increase productivity if you've been through a prompt engineering training, if you know how to use them effectively, realistically, you still need good old-fashioned change management to make sure people are using these tools correctly, AI compliance, breaking resistance to change, which is there for obvious reasons. People are uncertain about what this technology will do to their jobs, to their livelihoods. Whilst with AI agents, well, I believe agentic AI is a wave of AI that is inherently labor displacement technology, a technology that in the right hands of a senior software engineer or a senior customer support worker, so again, I underline the senior part, so an experienced worker who knows what to do with it and maybe has been also upskilled in how to use these agentic tools, can actually be much, much more productive than he or she was able to be just with a chatbot, a couple of years ago. So we're now at this inflection point in which I believe we will see these productivity gains. And then the question remains is, what other quote-unquote positive elements we'll see coming from this AI deployment? Because productivity gains are great for an economy, especially in Europe, but also in other countries and other regions of the world is not growing very fast given demographic changes and other challenges, geopolitical challenges. But my question, I'm going to stop with this one, at least for this topic, is what will or how will we as a society decide how those productivity gains will be distributed, both within companies and within society?
Precisely, and that's exactly what I wanted to unpack a little bit now. So we see the first figures coming out from a variety of, let's say, corners, business-friendly corners, consultancy companies, and so on. We can put some of these research also in the show notes. Their estimates of just what you described. Adoption has to move beyond just a simple, interface with the chat window, which also, by the way, begs the question when we look at the statistics of AI adoption. The question is always how and what. There is, minimalistic adoption, like everyone has probably entered something into a window to ask a question and get a reply to what you just described. Agentic AI or even semi-autonomous networks of AI agents. So the question often this figure is not broken down, so we don't really know exactly what these adoption percentage figures that are often bandied around actually means. But what I also want to first unpack is productivity gains. When you dig deeper and ask, what do we actually mean by productivity gains? In which sectors? It's also quite important. I mean, often the sectors seem to be software development, clear, but also then customer service, PR, these aspects. It's less clear in other sectors. But if I could quickly ask you about your insight on what do we mean by productivity gains, the way I understand it, and most of the material I plowed through, it's efficiency gains. So the worker can finally do certain activities that can be automated faster. Instead of 3 hours, it'll be 30 minutes. Some statistics we can see that there's a gap between the US and Europe, for example. In the US already, those that adopted these kind of AI tools have a productivity gain of 2.4% compared to Europe 1.2%. Sounds pretty low to me from the beginning. Okay, it's double the number in the US compared to Europe, but still very low. And then again, when you look at productivity gains, how it's defined, it's efficiency gains. My question would simply be, am I misreading this a little bit in terms of the effect? And what do we then do with these efficiency gains, as you rightly said? Does it allow companies to lay off more people? And does it mean the worker who survives the layoff simply has to do more volume of tasks in the same 8 to 10 hours? And then the question is, how at the individual level, of the worker level, is that an advantage and improvement? Let's put it this way.
Yeah, I mean, to unpack a bit what you said, I'm not familiar with that particular study that you mentioned, so I wouldn't necessarily comment on it before reviewing it, but we're still early in the AI phase, as you probably hear from most tech leaders in the media, and I think they're right. We're still very early. It took the cloud sector 10, 15 years to get from what Amazon was, I think, making a quarterly revenue of a few hundred million to now doing billions, and it took 10, 15 years. I think now it won't take as much time. That has been historically the almost certainty we had. If we look back all the way to electricity, down to social media, web, and now generative AI, the number of years needed for a technology to go from sort of invention, launch moment, in this case would be the ChatGPT moment in November 2022, to productivity gains and adoption at least a 21, 25% of the population in the US or in other places of the world. It's going to take much less time. And now to tackle the, I think, question of what efficiency gains, what productivity gains, I think, in other words, these AI tools, and in particular AI agents, will help, again, the most experienced workers who are also open to the technology and learn how to use it to do more work with either less junior people helping them or just more work in general, because we have plenty of people in the software engineering industry who are quote-unquote individual contributors who, anyways, were not managing a group of people, but now they can become even more productive with the help of AI agents. So yes, I think this is a reality and we see now in some of the layoffs that different companies are announcing in order to, in particular, fund the AI infrastructure build-up, which costs them billions. So the chips, the power sources, the data centers, they are cutting through, in most cases, either people who they overhired during the pandemic, because most big tech has overhired during the pandemic. They kind of overestimate a bit the actual demand. So they're cutting through, unfortunately, for a lot, maybe a lack of better term, they're trimming the fat. That's how it's called in the industry. And that's one aspect to it. The other one is that they are realizing, and again, and in particular in the tech sector, where they're leading in deployment, because they are obviously the best company, the best industry equipped to do it properly. They are seeing incredible results of just needing less people for certain roles. Not for all, because not all professions are impacted equally, and not all professions have what they call the same demand elasticity. With software engineering, there might be a reality in which, given Jevons paradox, that once you make something more efficient, it's going to be more cheap, and that means people will want more of it, and you'll still need software engineers for the foreseeable future, and probably the best ones will be paid even more, as we see now with some of Meta's hirings over the past few months. We're now having software engineers who are competing in terms of salaries with the LeBron James and Cristiano Ronaldo of the world, or at least getting to the same, almost the same sort of trajectory. So all this to say is that, long story short, we're seeing already efficiency gains that companies are, especially in the tech sectors, benefiting from doing more with less or with the same amount of people, because that's another aspect which I want to mention from the start. We cannot really talk about any sort of a mass AI-related layoffs. There has been more AI washing than actual AI-generated layoffs. But we can definitely talk about AI-induced hiring freeze. Companies have hired less, not just because of AI, but because of economic uncertainty, geopolitical volatility, over-hiring in the pandemic, and also because they're toying around, playing with these AI tools and having their leading engineers doing so to see actually how many people will they need in the future. So the direction of flight is very clear. The same headcount or less, not more, in most companies, in not just the tech sector, but in banking, in finance, across different sectors.
And I think that's an important word you just mentioned, AI washing, or using AI as an excuse or as a reason for factors that might actually not be solely AI related. So you mentioned the layoffs. Now the latest is Oracle, of course, with 30,000. But if you look at some of the big companies, Intel laid off 25,000 jobs in April last year, Amazon 16,000 January this year, Microsoft 9,000. And Block 4,000. So, all in all, 80,000 layoffs just in those handful of companies, of course, tech related. But there is a big number that often gets bandied around, the question of entry-level jobs. So lots of that is US data, because I think the US is where this discussion is happening more forcefully. So a figure I often see, also then picked up by blogs, publications, and so on, is that between 23 and 25 in the US labor market alone, there is roughly 35 to 38% reduction of entry-level jobs. Now, the question is, what percentage of that is AI related, or is just simply a sluggish economy where entry-level jobs are simply being frozen or limited? I think that's the first thing. It's been a good blog, in fact, on the World Economic Forum page on trying to disappear this month. Double check. But anyway, they disaggregated it a little bit, and they looked at AI highly exposed entry-level jobs and AI low exposed. So those jobs where you don't really need AI literacy compared to where you really should. And then if you look at those figures, essentially in the highly exposed, there is a 40% decline, indeed, of entry-level jobs. But in the low exposed, it's a 30% decline. So we're talking about a 10% difference in terms of AI. So the AI factor here of the entry-level jobs is maybe not as much as it's made out to be. So there could be many reasons, could be political reasons, right? Again, for blaming AI here positively with a positive spin on what actually might be a negative development of a leading economy. What's your take on this? I mean, again, is that, I think we can agree it's maybe a bit overhyped, but is it just waiting to happen more forcefully in the future on this entry-level job issue? Or can we now conclude, well, maybe we don't need to upskill so much of the workforce? So I'm trying to figure out a little bit between those two major arguments that economists also have. There's an AI hype on the one hand, and on those that say, no, we really need to take this seriously. Otherwise, we're sending many generations into unemployment. Where do you stand on that discussion?
I would sum up my stand with a Winston Churchill quote, which I often used in such discussions. It's very simple. It's failing to plan, it's planning to fail. And in my view, if we get complacent, looking too much at the sort of, if we try to nitty-pick, no, it's not that much AI, it's still okay, that's a very dangerous place to take, or position to take, because I feel, and the reason the way I'm usually positioning this to policymakers in particular who need to be more situational aware of this, and also to some economists, is that 10, 15, 20 years ago, it was not AI, at least not in knowledge jobs. It was mostly in factories, warehouses, which are, again, it was still automation. You can use the same term for it more broadly, but it was indeed mostly taking still labor, but labor that is what they call dull, dangerous, and in many cases sort of mundane. So as much as people were laid off, which is never a nice thing, it was not the creative work that now AI is targeting. Writing things, translating, which for many people is what they build their whole careers around. So it's a different ballgame, but the same situation of, let's not be complacent and say it's not a big percentage that AI played the role, because I feel it's already, even if it's 10%, it's substantial. And I'm 100% sure AI played the role in, again, the hiring freeze, simply because I speak with companies without naming them, and they told me we're hiring less interns. It's because we're trying to see if AI could help us do the same amount of work or more with what we currently have. So it's 100%. For me, that's, every time I hear about media outlets, or even there's papers about it sometimes that come up, people still question it. It's like, guys, the puck has moved. AI is disruptive. AI is impacting work, not equally, different professions in different ways. Let's see what we can do as a society to prepare ourselves for still what I also believe it's not the likeliest scenario, this scenario of AI disrupting massively a few professions that could cause quite a lot of economic turmoil. So I'm very realistic that it's not the main scenario to happen, which is fortunate for all of us. But by now, I think, and there's a recent paper from leading researchers from Stanford, Wharton, a few leading economists from the Fed in the US that I think put that rapid acceleration scenario of AI, which would have obviously the implicit economic consequences in terms of people being fired and so on, to I think 15%, if I remember correctly. So if, and I'm using now a metaphor used often in the AI safety conversations, if you'd have to board the plane tomorrow and you'd be told there's a 15% chance you're going to crash, will you still board? Most people would probably not take the chances. We're now having a technology potentially causing for certain groups of people, certain professions, such potentially existential risks to that profession. I think for that scenario, we have to prepare much better than we currently are. So that's kind of my positioning.
Can I ask you, so again, on the governance side, the decision to reduce at the entry-level job, as you said, that many company CEOs mentioned to you, is that a wise one in the long run? So thinking about, the entry-level jobs obviously at some point will become a middle manager, will become a senior manager. We also see, of course, much more focus on the senior level managers right now and workforce in terms of training, in terms of where the value really at the moment is. But these people at some point retire and you need in the pipeline the next generation. And you can look at this across industries. I see, talk a lot of sectors I'm still familiar with. Also, if you think the legal sector, right? At some point run into issue that today's entry-level employee will be tomorrow's senior partner.
Exactly. So you really hit the nail on its head. It's one of the arguments I'm bringing. When I have the opportunity to train a company in prompt engineering, I'm definitely using those opportunities to make sure I try to nudge the executives I have the chance to speak with to the sort of pro-worker AI and to not forget about the talent pipeline. So I'm fully on board with this. And that's, I think, one of the scenarios which is more benign that I'm seeing going forward, that yes, companies are now trying to see how much they can do with the existing workforce to deploy AI. But at the same time, they will realize sooner or later, and many have already, that they have people in the executive, in the C-suite who are retiring. So they need to continue building that talent pipeline. So what might happen as I called it, a benign scenario is maybe a company that used to hire, let's give just a basic number, 10 interns every year. I hope that they will still hire 5 and double down on how well they train them. And then the question will be for society of what do you do with the 5 that are no longer needed for that job? How do you make sure they're well positioned to take the next opportunity or to become entrepreneurs? Because as a side note, and I as much as I push against this typical answer you'd hear from a tech executive that AI will lead to have many more entrepreneurs, which I think it's partially true that yes, it's definitely making it easier, but entrepreneurship is not for everybody. So it's not like the kids being born today are going to be out of a sudden with entrepreneurial genes more than they have over the past hundreds of years. No, it's going to be the same kids who grow up in a world that they would see opportunities for entrepreneurship, but many will just choose not to go ahead because it's not for them. They prefer a different kind of lifestyle. So whilst I, again, don't believe it's as exciting for the entrepreneurs of the future as many tech leaders say, there will be opportunities. So if those 5 interns, going back to my example, are not hired or not needed anymore, yes, provide them with this potential alternative to become entrepreneurs. And you potentially as a company, because I do see a future where companies should be even more involved in, and there's already examples from the tech sector of, we will need to fire these X amount of people. How can we make sure that they're well positioned to take opportunities elsewhere? And this is something that is already happening, and I think and I hope for a future in which, if not the companies do it benevolently and by their own volition, the governments will ask them, hey, you're not allowed to fire X amount of people, even though you could as of tomorrow because of this technology, unless you make sure they're well placed in a different profession that maybe has a talent gap.
Right, yeah, the issue then on how to prepare the future workforce at the entry-level jobs. So of course, that pushes a little bit the conversations to the intersection of business world, labor market, and education institutions. So there's more and more work now coming out, of course, on how do we prepare the next generation of workers better for an AI-heavy sector and economy. And of course, that also with my other hat as a university professor, I'm also seeing now more and more the adoption of generative AI tools for research, for data collection, data writing, and so on. And the big concern, of course, revolves around critical AI literacy. So AI literacy in itself, very important. So how to use these tools and to indeed use it for productivity gains, and that you don't enter a workforce where everyone else knows this and you don't. Very important for us, of course, at universities. On the other hand, though, the critical ability, how not to use it and how to trust the results of those tools, but also the effect it has on cognitive abilities and cognitive confidence. So it's vast amount of research coming out, first started in the US with an MIT study on cognitive offloading, so-called cognitive offloading, so where students more and more don't trust their own judgment. That's linked then to cognitive lack of confidence. So essentially, the more you use these tools, the more students question their own abilities and simply say, the AI program is probably better at that. Why should I not do this? Number one, and cognitive fatigue. Also, we see now more research coming out of China as well, large-scale studies on the effect of Chinese students, and all reporting the same issue. So I see a little bit, a governance gap where employers ask for universities and even secondary schools for be more proactive in teaching students on these tools and be well versed in them. On the other hand, while we're doing it, we also see either misuse, so the amount of trainings you can do on using it properly, i.e. don't trust 100% what comes out, you still have to critically evaluate it, you still have to be the co-author, is always what we teach, but at the end of the day, the user will not do it because it's more tempting and it's easier simply to push a button and then your entire essay is written. And we also clearly see, and that's for me just anecdotal, a decline of the abilities of students to critically analyze and come up with original ideas. I find this also worrying for the entrepreneurial spirit. Far poorer quality of the outputs and a lack of confidence in their own skills. So how do we square that circle and adopt that? Because I also see wider societal issues linked to that. I mean, again, we come back to that when we discuss another episode, democracy, because it also means not only students are not only future employees, but they're also citizens that have to critically use their brains and analytical capabilities, not only for work, but also for assessing threats to democracy and so on and so forth.
Yeah, I think you're already, if I may say so, lucky enough to be in the situation that you are, from what I can tell, a professor that encourages the use of it as long as it's mindful and responsible.
I wouldn't describe myself like that. I had to accept it. Exactly, I had to accept that is the reality. I wouldn't encourage it, but yeah.
Because I think that's, from my perspective, another challenge that many professors in universities have, that they either outright banned it, which obviously doesn't usually work, given that you can ban something at school, at university, but it's hard to control, obviously, and it's not advisable to try to do so when the child or the teenager or the young adult is at home or with his or her friends and using these tools. So I think the solution is only to encourage the responsible use, and actually I wouldn't be shying away from the word encourage, because again, with the right guidelines and support, it can be a tool for good, as long as you rightfully pointed out, you don't become addicted to it to the same degree you are, or many of us are, to social media. AI has, and there were some recent studies which, to be really honest, I have to unpack a bit more to get to the actual sort of substance a bit, but the sort of headline is that AI might actually help reverse some of the polarizing effects of social media. Again, don't quote me on that. Do Google to look for the study. But there's definitely a remedy, and I do mention it in my own prompt engineering trainings. One of the use cases that I prepare employees for is how to prepare for an interview or for a debate using AI. And usually you can, if you're prompting correctly, use AI to actually better understand the other side of the debate that you might be very much against. So there's many benefits to it with the right support and skilling, and again, not with banning, because I think the genie is out of the bottle. And when you speak at university students, because I'm referring now just to university students, I think banning is not the solution. Whilst I think primary, secondary school, there maybe should be a more serious discussion of banning, simply because whilst when you're in your early 20s, you might already have had the opportunity to develop, at least to a certain degree, your critical thinking muscle, because it is like a muscle. Ideally. If you're 7, 8, just starting school in this sort of paradigm shift with AI and leveraging AI for any sort of a cognitive work, which is happening. It's a reality, as crazy as it might sound, in different schools around the world where there's not either the right teaching staff or not adequate teaching staff in terms of number to support each pupil with this. Then you grow up into an adult, which is definitely less prepared to discern fact from fiction. So that is one of the dangers that I'm genuinely concerned of, even more than what AI will do to jobs, because that will be more of AI will do to jobs some good things, some bad things, but it will definitely depend on a profession by profession basis. When it comes to AI in the hands of a 7 or 8 year old, unless they're really well guided by teachers, school, parents, society, it will more likely lead to a young person who becomes really over-reliant on a technology that does everything for him or her without really training that really critical muscle that they will probably need throughout their lives more than anything these days, which is critical thinking.
Yeah, absolutely agree. And there are really also in this country, in my own immediate surroundings, examples where even in primary school it's encouraged that the kids use it to write New Year's Eve letters to that are normally handwritten, their own ideas with AI now. I find this a bit worrying. But still, I don't think we have the answers, either higher education or in the business sector or government even right now, on this paradox. Yes, familiarity with the tools to be able to survive in this new reality, and the increasing evidence that it actually undermines the very skill we need for succeeding in a high-level AI job. The key thing in any publication looking at what do we actually need the human in the loop to be, the critical evaluator of the output and the effectiveness of AI-generated material. But if you no longer teach the actual methods to hone students' critical thinking skills, and they no longer also have any incentive to do so, because it's simply easier to generate it without spending any more time on your own essays, we have a problem. So where should the critical thinking ability come from? I feel we're pushing it down every level. So the business sector pushes us to the universities. We can now have an argument and push it to secondary schools. We can say, yeah, but if you don't arrive at university already with critical skills that you learned in your secondary school, what are we doing? And then secondary schools would say, yeah, but we're already dealing with other issues than critical thinking that you should learn at university. So I see a real danger there. And really more and more scientific evidence now that the critical thinking skills and the willingness and confidence to deploy them is declining. And that's not only an issue then for education, for free thinking and citizenship. I'd even say we need at some point again a new renaissance, an Immanuel Kant approach of sapere aude, dare to use your own brain. But it also is an issue for the business sector, because if you want entry-level graduates that will essentially supervise the task execution jobs that AI agents will do and check for quality and mistakes, you need their critical thinking skills that at the moment I think we're running into discarding. Just as in my own practice, I can tell you, so I'm definitely not an enthusiastic adopter, as you might have heard by now, but I try to find ways to deal with it now. But it already has an impact on our education tools because, for example, I had to now ban the use of term papers. Term papers is the key for developing arguments, going for hours into the library, exposing yourself to arguments of different thinkers, and then synthesize it with your own idea and bring your own voice and your ideas into it. This is the best tool. I really am not a fan of exams where you just have to reproduce certain things. But we're already now, because we see that, I would say 98% of term papers are AI generated without necessary critical evaluation, so that more or less then soulless pieces where the student didn't engage in any kind of cognitive thinking, that we cannot use them anymore. So it already has an effect. It means a key education tool has been discarded and is now being replaced by controlled environment lab exams. That's not good. It's not good for the higher education sector, not good for the employment sector future. So struggling with that. Maybe you have you have an answer or a different approach that could be done. Where are we heading there, and at this interface between the education institutions and the employment sector that are simply seem to be wanting the same thing but facing different realities, obviously, now?
Yeah, I think nobody has a clear-cut answer to this, I think, very important societal question, more than just an education-related one. But there's different solutions I'm hearing from fellow professors, parents, because many of them are in my audience for my talks, for my trainings, and I ask them curiously, not having children myself, at least not yet, how do you deal with this? Because I find it's like a incredibly difficult challenge. And even yesterday I was listening as a parent to a podcast from a few tech investors in the US who are parents, fathers. It was a group of 4 men. And they're struggling to this whole dimension of not just AI, but again, going back to this other big discussion, which I don't want to open now, maybe in another podcast, of social media becoming sort of illegal if you're not older than 16. And some of them were pro, others were against. But even the ones who were pro, they said, well, in our group of parents in the sort of a school, I'm sending my 2 sons. Some parents were okay to use Snapchat or other social media apps, others are not. So if 8 out of 10 parents are okay and 2 are not, what does that do to the kids who are then banned using a technology that their 2 friends can? So a whole challenge, but to bring it back to maybe some potential solutions and maybe to also phrase them or frame them into I think it was a Chinese saying, everything in good doses. Because again, in particular, generative AI, maybe less so social media, but even social media in the right dosage can have positive effects in terms of you can communicate better, you can keep in touch. The question is that because these tools are done by people who have PhDs in behavioral science, they're addictive. And it's a challenge for us adults to deal with this addictiveness, equally so, maybe even more so for children. So what can we do as professors, parents, to still encourage people to use now generative AI? Because it's, again, the genie is out the bottle, but do so in the most sort of a beneficial way. So one way I hear that the professor, an American professor that was once attending a talk I gave, that he was of the opinion that I since then heard from others and kind of took it as one of the approach I recommend, which is this encouragement to use it, because he saw colleagues in his university. Some were banning it, some were encouraging it, but he did see better results from the ones who encouraged the use, and in university, again, to underline. And then he followed suit and he sees now benefits, but not just I encourage my students to use it and that's it. He made sure that he adapted his assessment methods, indeed, not giving as many essays as in the past, more presentations or more essays that were then followed by a presentation, which obviously come with different challenges of assessing and bias and so on. But anyhow, any change comes with challenges of its own. But very importantly, when he even asked pupils to write an essay or written paper, yes, use AI or whatever. I know you will use AI, but you will have to be prepared in front of your class to say why you used it and how you used it, to explain the thought process behind. So even though it's not the same as explaining the thought process behind the theory that you've laid out there with the help of AI, like it maybe has been in the past, it's a matter of can you at least explain and use your critical thinking to say how you used it, how you adapted, how you made it your own. And you'll be, quote unquote, downgraded accordingly if you cannot explain it, because it means you just literally copy pasted the text AI gave you. Is it the same? No. And I definitely agree with you that writing is one of the best ways that at least society has so far came up with to train critical thinking. The idea of staying with the problem for longer. We'll need to find different ways, because this one, as you rightly said, it's clearly going away, and not just at the student level or pupil level in primary, secondary school. Researchers, there's now research on how researchers are using AI, and there's been a plethora of AI augmented publication, to put it bluntly, and maybe nicely, not fully generated, but really augmented in a way that it will encourage the publications are much more research, quantity-wise, but the quality and original thinking is no longer to the same level. And that's already measured. And it's with what we often, again, forget is it's measured according to tools that already are a year old. This is pre-agentic AI. Imagine what this will do as it continues to develop. So indeed, the potential risks and opportunities, again, if things continue on the same direction of flight, are tremendous. Again, both pros and cons. How can we nudge society more towards the pros than the cons on any of these topics? Education, research, employment. I feel if we leave it to the sort of a market to solve it, it's definitely not the way to do so. And we've seen that from social media and other sort of recent technological innovations, that you cannot just leave it to the markets. So my work in the advocacy work I do online and offline is how can you bring enough civil society leaders and policymakers to the same level of situational awareness I have and others working in the space deeply embedded, so they realize and nudge society at this moment where we still have time to change course at least slightly towards the more positive outcome from AI across this range of key topics: impact on education, impact on work, because the current direction of flight is, in my view, not the one that is positioning us humans as a whole in the best way possible.
Yeah. And it is absolutely a governance issue. So,
Yes.
so we can't, it is across, and we can't leave it to individual institutions, companies, even individual ministries to muddle through in an unconnected way. I think this is where the key issue of governance and guidance comes to. And just let me briefly comment on what you said about the professor that adopted or let students adopt AI and then explain how they use it and critically evaluate it. Lots of tools we also tried, but even that you can of course automate. So a student can of course say, please give me now a quick 2-pager on how I critiqued it and so on. So it's a complete chasing the rabbit race, and it all depends on, of course, trust between the educator and the student. That's the first thing. But it also is about simply incentives and competing pressures. I mean, students also are exposed to a variety of pressures, time pressures. They might often have to work next to their studies and so on. Of course, the incentive, a little bit like the struggle I have with junk food and sweets and so on. You know it's wrong and you shouldn't be doing it, but the incentive is too strong and you can't handle the pressure in certain periods. So then all these things we have and all these well-meaning initiatives to do a critical AI literacy approach go out of the window. So I think that's where the challenge is. So we need, I think, more governance reflections on that, also guidance at universities. Universities are relatively slow in coming up with good solutions there.
And they're straight to interrupt, but there's one element that is important that is both at and ideally it should be at the teacher-professor level, if not at home as well. And this is something that maybe it will sound naive, and I apologize in advance, but I'm not a professor myself, at least not yet, so I'm speaking as a former pupil. And I come originally from Romania, which is a former Soviet country with maybe still, even up to this day, to some degree, former Soviet ways. I was rarely, if ever, and I did have some amazing professors who did do the effort, explained why am I writing this long piece of paper on this particular book?
Absolutely.
So having that extra effort of explaining, even though it might sound like it's too trivial of a solution to work, don't underestimate kids nowadays. They are seeing it like their future is on the line. Just 2 days ago, I offered mentorship to the son of a friend of mine who's 16 now, thinking of studies and education abroad and work in the future. They're genuinely concerned as well because they read the same media we read about AI taking jobs and whatnot. And they realize with the right support of a parent who's doing this or the professor who's doing this as, hey, I'm asking you to write this paper and put your own effort into it as much as you can because it could be the difference between you getting that scarce job and not.
Absolutely.
So delegate it to AI at your own risk if you want.
And I completely agree with you. We have to also, for the complete picture, and that's at a higher education critical here of my own industry, AI is a magnifier of existing trends and issues. So what AI is now doing in higher education, it magnifies things that have already gone wrong for decades in higher education. And that is, of course, the kind of system where not enough time is spent with the student on assignments, on the feedback, on a real dialogue where you have enough time and enough quality conversations about mentoring the student along. It's simply classes, lecture halls are too large. The time spent with each student, even for correcting the work, is too minimized. So even before the arrival of AI, you had a suboptimal issue here in forming critical thinking, and now that gets accelerated. So it's almost and that's almost a symptom in many sectors, not just higher education.
But that's where AI can help. So that is one of the benefits of AI that is potentially a huge boon for education, is in the right hands of a professor who coordinates accordingly. Even Google Gemini and other sort of mainstream free tools have the option of, it's just literally a button you have to toggle of use AI as a tutor. So that AI will no longer give you answers to your questions as, here is the essay. It will nudge you like a tutor, like a coach, to come up yourself with the actual answer, but in a coaching kind of fashion. So there's ways to use AI exactly to do this sort of a tutoring that maybe now in a class of 30, the professor doesn't have this chance to engage equally with everybody. And they could, again, in the right context, have a tutor that helps each pupil within guardrails and sort of restricted environments, let's say, to follow up on something that maybe the professor didn't have a chance to explain to the last kid in class before recess.
Yeah.
So there's opportunity as well there, I think.
I agree partially. I remain a bit skeptical about it. I mean, I've seen, Khan Academy, for example, where you do it for secondary school tutoring, maths and so on. I'm skeptical in social sciences, international relations and so on. I actually think in the future of education, and then we'll wrap up on education, it's going in the opposed view. You will have a two-tier system. You will have a higher education system with AI support, mass education, and then some elite institutions will come up again to the Oxford-Cambridge model, where your laptop will be banned, your phone will be banned, and it will be the training the mind, focusing your attention, reading books, and being in very small groups to really develop your critical thinking without any digital tools. I think that's probably in 10, 15 years where we're going to go. Whether that's desirable is a question, but lots of things still to be discussed on this topic.
Yeah, on this topic, I would even go further. I would go back to the Socratic method. Socrates. That's the education we would want. And how can we scale that? How can we use AI to scale that concept as well as obviously equip these pupils with the AI literacy skills they need? Because you cannot do one or the other. You have to do both.
Yeah.
You cannot have this Oxford style, Cambridge style, or the Socratic style I described by just discussing the big philosophical questions of the world without knowing how to use these tools. So it's finding a balance between the two. Using AI tools to a certain point, but also not sort of foregoing this sort of key critical thinking skills, creativity, collaboration, communication, the 4 C's as the Finnish government called them in the past. These will be skills that you cannot develop if you use AI from your primary school.
Yeah.
You have to develop them and then use AI to augment them.
Right. Yeah.
To end on a positive note.
Absolutely. It'll be a challenge. Very briefly, the issue of adoption. So AI adoption, I know you advocate a lot for, Europe cannot win the, let's say, hardware and development and innovation race, but it could win the adoption race. In other words, we need to have the system in place, and companies have to encourage through different processes the adoption of AI. We have a bit of a problem with the adoption trust gap, right? So a variety of studies coming out or surveys that show that the recent one on the US workforce survey of 1,500 employees, use of AI 68%, but receiving training only 17%. So we have a gap on the training on the one hand and the proper use, but then also an issue of trust, where trust in the outcome of the products of AI, text generated or data collected, is around 30%. So the answer was the question: how much percent of you trust rarely or only sometimes the products of AI? And then the figures around 70%. So that means only 30% really fully say, yeah, this is great. So, and there's always problems with the surveys, but how would that issue be tackled in terms of the adoption, or to reduce a little bit the trust gap on the one hand, but also how would adoption be facilitated in your view?
Yeah, indeed. I would underline that surveys are surveys, and there's a lot of people who use these AI tools, and I would call them, let's say, even power users, some of them, and they're not declaring it for reasons that they know they could be reprimanded at work if they have an employer who's not yet on board with this sort of a use AI at work.
And what does use mean, right?
And what does use mean? Going back to your initial question, does it mean you're using weekly, daily? I mean, even now, I think some of the leading AI labs, be it OpenAI or Anthropic, were not publishing, if I remember correctly, adoption or usage, better said, on a daily basis, but they're just sort of broadly on a weekly and monthly basis. And how many hours does that mean? So many question marks there regarding the survey. But to answer your question, I think it's just a matter of time, because in my own engagement with different companies where I train them to do prompt engineering, there's always a champion. And I actually love to work with these AI champions, people who are pushing towards the use of AI that is not just efficient but also responsible. And my recommendations to many companies is to find these AI power users and leverage them as the people who help your other colleagues who maybe are a bit more reticent to jump on this sort of a bandwagon. Because the realistic scenario is that, and we see now with all the layoffs we covered, if push comes to shove and we'll have a market downturn induced by the Iran war or by just sort of the AI bubble that is growing, given all these infrastructure investments, the workers that will be preferred and safeguarded will be the ones using these tools. Mm-hmm. So that's why I'm encouraging, especially in the workplace, because we're talking about adults, use these tools. And you break that sort of a resistance to change by having colleagues who are showing you, look, I'm doing a similar job or the same job as you, quicker, still responsible within the guardrails. And that's how you could do it. And that has been, from my experience, more successful than pretty much any other approach. Because the problem that we see in most organizations is that the directive of use AI comes really top down. Mm-hmm. It comes from the C-suite, which is not impacted by AI to the same degree. It's not like the people deciding to use AI will use AI to replace their own jobs? No, realistically, AI will be used to disrupt jobs of people underneath in terms of the management layers and so on. So there's no anxiety there. There's all sort of hands on deck. Let's see how we can use AI. And because of this top-down approach, people, for obvious reasons, are pushing back. In some cases more vocally than others. And that's why both HR, and I wanted to mention this because I often speak at HR conferences, HR has a huge opportunity and a huge role to play in this whole AI transition because they will have to be able to push back sometimes on the C-suite executives' demands, make employees' voices heard, but also get employees on board because there's no other way other than leveraging AI, but again, responsibly, not just efficiently. And leveraging these AI champions, as I mentioned, as a way to increase adoption because the best way to do it is, as I said, seeing your colleague doing the same job, being able to finish work faster and maybe go home, or being given a promotion if that company is pushing the employees who do more work to just do more work, which is more often the case.
Right.
But still, that other person using it will get more opportunities than you. And that will nudge most people to either quit and find a different place because different priorities in life, and I respect that, or some people push them to this sort of AI adopter bandwagon, try to fight them until a point, or the quote Gandhi said at some point, you start by fighting them initially, but then you join them when you see the benefits are there and that ideally the training support is there, and that's where I come along. Companies bring me and other AI trainers to help translate that sort of we have a tool or a subscription we got, you employees, let's use them, let's use these subscriptions, and then they do need, in many cases, some hand-holding to understand how to use them efficiently and responsibly. And then the AI champions to champion the usage and be there to support whenever a trainer is not there to do so.
Yeah. David, it's all time we have for this first kickoff episode. Lots of discussions and topics still to go through. So, of course, the EU's approach to AI, we were going to cover the societal impact, universal basic income issues, for example, questions on how to deal with, let's say, segments of society that do not find their feet in work, and there will be major disruptions, international dimensions as well. But for now, thanks so much for being here and for all your insights, and see you soon.
Thank you very much. See you very soon.
Thank you for listening to the State of the Globe podcast. For more information and analysis, visit globalgovernance.eu. Until next time.